Being the founder of one of the most prominent and expensive car brands surely did not come without its own share of downsides. From almost being killed alongside his father and brother by a deadly illness, to being rejected for his dream job, Enzo Ferrari's life has been anything but easy. So, how did he manage to find a way to become the founder of the legendary Ferrari car? Alfredo Ferrari and Adalgisa Bisbini met at Alfredo's father's grocery store, and they hit it off immediately. Alfredo lived in Capri, and after being in a relationship with Adalgisa for a while, they moved to Modena to start their family. Alfredo started a workshop where he fabricated metal parts for cars, while his wife stayed at home, helping where she could with petty jobs. She soon got pregnant with Alfredo Jr., Dino, and only a few years later, she got pregnant again and had Enzo in 1898. Enzo Ferrari's birth had a long, painful labor, as well as multiple stories on how it happened. One source states that he was born on the 18th of February in the wee hours of the night and in the middle of a snowstorm that didn't allow his father to get to the local registry office to register his birth until 2 days later, on the 20th of February. Another source states that he was born on the 20th of February and his birth was reported by a midwife and registered on the 24th of February. What we do know and are sure of is that Enzo was born sometime in February. Enzo was an energetic child who indicated his interest in his father's workshop pretty early on and started to assist him once he became of age. The family was not well-to-do, surviving on Alfredo Sr.'s meager salary and whatever his wife, Adalgisa, brought home from the petty jobs she took on from the wives of other well-to-do families, so they could not send their sons to get formal education. It didn't stop Enzo from learning from his friends in the neighborhood, alongside learning all that he could about cars from his father in the workshop. From when he was little, he was a very resourceful kid and loved to learn. Because of his father's occupation, he had the opportunity of watching a few of the streetcar races that took place in the neighborhood. Whenever Alfredo Sr. would get a job supplying parts for a higher-end car, he took Enzo with him to be his little assistant. It was on one of these work trips that a 10-year-old Enzo went with his father, and he witnessed Felice Nazzaro's win at the 1908 Circuito de Bologna, which was a Grand Prix race, and decided that he wanted to be just like Felice, a race car driver. He continued to work toward his dream of being a race car driver by learning to drive with cars that were left at his father's workshop for him to fix. He also assisted with fixing, allowing for his father to expand to carpentry. All of his dreams came to a halt when the Second World War started in 1914 and 16-year-old Enzo had to enlist. He served in the 3rd Mountain Artillery Regiment of the Italian Army until the end of the war in 1918. Unfortunately, Enzo fell ill from the deadly Italian flu and was discharged back home, where he came home to bad news, learning that his father and older brother had been killed by the same flu, leaving just his mother as his only surviving family. Following his father and brother's sickness and death, their family business collapsed, and his mother took on the sole role of providing for herself and her sick son. Once he recovered, Enzo began pursuing his dreams again by applying to Fiat, but they were quick to reject his services, seeing as his skills were not enough for their establishment. It didn't discourage the young man, and he went on to apply to a dozen more car companies, eventually scoring a win and settling as a test driver for Costruzioni Meccaniche Nazionali, or CMN. They were a car manufacturing company in Milan that rebuilt used-up trucks into smaller passenger cars. After working there for about a year, he was promoted to the race car driver and made his competitive race car driving debut in the 1919 Parma Poggio di Barcerto hill climb race, where he ended up 4th place in the race. In November of the same year, Ferrari would go on to compete in another race, the Targa Florio, but had to drop out of the race because the fuel tank of his car started to leak. He was not the only one to retire from the race, and because of that, he wasn't disqualified and ended up taking 9th place in the race. In 1920, Enzo Ferrari joined the department of Alfa Romeo as a race car driver, and in 1923, at the age of 25, he won his first Grand Prix race in Ravenna, just like he had always dreamed. It was also the same year he got married to Laura Domenica, who he stayed married to until she died. 1924 was Ferrari's best racing season, as he went on to win 3 high-profile races, including Ravenna, the Coppa Acerbo, and Polesine. His close friends and fellow racers Ugo Savocci and Antonio Ascari died in 1923 and 1924, and the close succession of their deaths made him spiral into depression. The 3 usually raced alongside each other, and after 2 of them died, he fell into a deep depression and wanted to stop racing completely. Because of the fame he had gathered and a little convincing from his wife, Ferrari continued to race half-heartedly, most of his interest shifting into the organizational aspects of Grand Prix racing. At the time of his return, Ferrari had participated in 41 Grand Prix and won 11 of them, which is pretty record-breaking for any race car driver. His son Alfredo, Dino, named after his father and brother, was born to him in 1932, and following his birth, Ferrari decided to retire from being at the steering wheel completely and begin pursuing the managerial aspect of Alfa race cars. He worked hard to build up a team of race drivers that were just as good as him, including Giuseppe Campari and Tazio Nuvolari. Ferrari named the team Scuderia Ferrari and was founded back in 1929 before he retired from racing. The team was incredibly successful, thanks to the incredibly talented drivers and the very cool Alfa Romeo P3s that they drove. During this time, the prancing horse emblem started to show up on Ferrari's cars. It actually belonged to a fellow friend of his and a fellow World War I vet, a fighter jet pilot named Francesco Baracca. But after he was shot and killed during combat, Ferrari decided to use the horse too as an emblem, and it would later go on to be the famous logo for his own company, in memory of his dear friend. The first Ferrari logo would then be spotted in the year 1947. In 1937, the racing group Ferrari built with the two incredible drivers Campari and Nuvolari was dissolved, and he began working chiefly for the Alfa company again. But he only stayed with them for a short while, leaving in 1939 after a fallout with the company's managing director, Ugo Gabotto. He would go on to found his own company, Auto Avio Costruzioni. The company supplied parts to other racing companies, which was somewhat similar to what his father used to do. The reason why he started selling car parts instead of designing cars or racing was because he was still bound by contract to Alfa Romeo, which made racing or designing any original work illegal for 4 years. Despite the clause, Enzo was able to find a way to design two whole cars for the 1940 Mille Miglia, which were then driven by Alberto Ascari and Lotario Rangoni, two high-profile race car drivers. Unfortunately, his current success was short-lived when the Second World War swept in, and Ferrari's company was forced to take on war production. Once the war ended, Enzo Ferrari moved from Modella to Maranello with his family, deciding to settle down and start making cars that bore his name and his logo in 1947. With his own company now running, Ferrari decided to race against the team that he had helped build for Alfa Romeo with a team of his own. He didn't get any major wins until the year 1949 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, using a Ferrari 166M that was driven by two of his new talents. And the very next year, he got his first World Championship win, where he reportedly cried like a baby right after it. Apart from being an avid car designer and at the forefront of the racing industry, he also regularly contributed to an auto publication called Auto Sprints. During a race in 1957, one of Ferrari's cars blew a tire, which caused a ghastly accident that claimed the lives of 11 people in total: the driver, his co-driver, and 9 other spectators, 5 of whom were children. Enzo had a pretty reserved life, keeping to himself for the most part. He mostly moved between Modena and Maranello, rarely ever leaving both places and never attending any Grand Prix events that were hosted outside of Italy. The only time he went abroad was on a business trip to Paris, and he went by train. Whether he was deathly afraid of planes or just cautious, we'll never know. But what we do know is that Ferrari never set his foot in jets, planes, or lifts, basically anything that lifted him off the ground. Enzo's son, Alfredo, Dino Ferrari, went alongside his father to many of the racing events, and was even groomed to take over the company after his father would retire. Unfortunately, Dino passed away from muscular dystrophy in 1956. People were worried that Enzo didn't have any heirs to inherit his fortune after he was gone, but he did. In 1945, Enzo's mistress bore him a son, Piero, but the boy had to be hidden from the world because he wasn't recognized as a true son of Ferrari. In Italy, divorce was illegal for many years, only legalizing in 1975, and any children born out of wedlock were usually not claimed. Piero was eventually recognized after Enzo's wife Laura died, and he worked alongside his father for many years. Even today, he is still the vice chairman of his father's company, owning 10% in shares. Ferrari lived a long life, passing away in 1988 at the age of 90 to natural causes. Just a few weeks after his death, the Italian Grand Prix was held, and even after he died, his team continued to stay at the top of the racing game, making his name proud. Just before his death, he witnessed the production of the Ferrari F40, and after he passed, the company started the production of the Ferrari Enzo, named after its founder and launched in 2002. Ferrari was a legend, and the media has made many attempts to immortalize him. In 2003, there was a self-titled film about him, and many other references have come out since. The 2013 film Rush, the 2019 film Ford v Ferrari, and even a new upcoming one of the same name as the first, Ferrari. It is set to be released in 2023, and there are still few back and forths about who will get to play Enzo. Many people think that the football player Mesut Ozil should be the one to play him, seeing as they bear a striking resemblance to each other, and Ozil was born just 2 years after Enzo died.